People like Yulia and me, we're below justice. People like Mercy Botha, they're above it. There is no middle, there is no justice. When Yulia was arrested, it was mistaken identity. Before anyone else was even aware she'd been arrested, she was transferred to the prison factory due to a paperwork error. An industrial accident left her dead on the second day. I found her body in the morgue at the special work prison, 600 kilometers away from the prison factory where they said she'd died. The SWP was, in all but name, a brothel for the rich and powerful. Young men and women were sold by the hour for the perverted delights of the elite, the haves taking even more from the have-nots. I'd been lucky enough to find and retrieve her body by claiming I was her mother. Before she was cremated, it was obvious enough to me, but the forensic pathologist confirmed that her death was not from an industrial accident, or indeed even accidental. 12 rounds from a guard's pistol at short range is far from accidental. Not that any kind of investigation would be done, and no justice beyond firing the guard for unauthorized discharge of a firearm and sending him back to the city. As I said, we're below justice, as is the guard now. While he wore the uniform, he enjoyed the benefits, but those at the top will sacrifice as many of us as needed to keep the masses placated. I'm done being placated. I believed the guard when he looked at me with his haunted eyes. He told me how the warden made him shoot her in front of the other new inmates as an example of what happens when you say no. I believed him when he told me who was involved and how their enterprise works. I believed him, but I didn't answer his pleas for forgiveness. I looked down at where he knelt in front of me, his eyes filled with tears. You could have, should have said no, I said, like she did. His eyes grew wide as I drew the blade I'd hidden in my palm across his throat. The guttural gurgling he made was his last sound, and how I will forever remember him. I would have preferred to shoot him 12 times, but guns are not allowed to city residents. When he was found a day later, in the sweltering June heat, he was logged as the 417th murder victim in the city for the year. I followed the public records for a couple weeks until I was certain no one was coming forward to claim him. Like most of the murders in this city, his would be ignored, to be marked closed, unsolved after some arbitrary number of days or weeks. The rich and those of us they found useful, low-office politicians, faith leaders, entertainers, even the military, didn't come to the city unless they had to. Police were another of the lower class that the elites found useful, but they still had to live with us in the muck and filth. That utility, though, has limits. When a useful poor becomes the slightest liability, they're cut off, returned to the cesspool as waste. 2 officers were killed on the job, their throats slit while responding to a break-in call. The initial response was outrage from the elites and a citywide manhunt. When it came out they were working a scam to arrest young people who fit the description of a real target and selling them to the SWP with faked paperwork, the response was to mark the case as closed, unsolved, and shut up about the whole thing, especially SWP involvement. There may have been others in the precinct involved, but I had no evidence, so they escaped my justice. That left one person I had proof of involvement from, the warden, and one that was complicit in all the abuses of the SWP. Mercy Botha, the owner of the SWP and the prison factories, would pay for her complicity in Yulia's death. They're both part of the haves, and as such are, as I mentioned earlier, above justice. At least, that's what they think. When justice is personal, though, there is no above or below. The warden is an odd one. Like me, he was born in the city and made himself useful in the military. Unlike me, he wasn't kicked out for punching a senior officer. I doubt very. Many senior officers were trying to grope him. We were warned in boot camp that as women, we should expect that sort of thing and grow a thick skin. That lesson didn't sit well with me. After his military retirement, he contracted as security to the rich and famous until he had enough money to buy his way into society. He was on the bottom of the ladder for sure, but he'd made it as one of the elite. His residence was just outside the grounds of the SWP, and rumor had it he had a couple of favorite inmates he frequented on his days off, along with some very specific kinks. The hard part would be passing myself off as one. The lower class, upper class. Not just useful, but someone who, like the warden, had bought my way into society. The military taught me how to blend into the shadows, how to disappear, and how to kill. Yulia's murder gave me a reason to use that training. Similarly, living in the city meant I knew a lot of people with specific criminal skills, but this was the first time I'd sought to hire one. I told the identity broker what I needed, and he called me 3 days later. He had the perfect ID for me, along with a no-limit credit card that would work for 30 days, but the price would be high. I made him show me the goods before I'd agree to his terms. The ID was perfect, as was the credit card. I could play the part of the vapid divorcee of a hedge fund manager, living on a fat settlement and alimony. He handed me a printout of a photo. This one. She comes back to work for me today or kill her. That's the price. He tried to look intimidating. As he said, I have to make an example of her, otherwise I'll look weak. Those 3 words echoed in my head. Make an example. I smiled at his failed attempt to seem dangerous to me. You look weak, because you are weak, just like the warden. I slashed the blade across his throat before he could react. I snatched the ID and the credit card to protect them from blood spatter. As he choked on his own blood, I told him, You should have let her go. You made the offer, I made the choice, your life or hers. I don't know her, but she's obviously stronger than you. I took my phone out of the Faraday bag when I got home, and it started chiming immediately. Missed calls from a number I didn't recognize. I called back and was met with an instant tirade. I don't know who you are, but I'm going to find out, and when I do, you'll be the newest attraction at special work. Jarvis said you're too old for regular use, but we'll sell you cheap as a pain pig. No safe words, no limits. It seemed I had gotten under someone's skin. Mercy Botha, I presume. Good. You know who I am, so you know what I can do to you. You've had your payback for your little bitch. If you know what's good for you, you'll leave it there. Ms. Botha, I put as much honey into my voice as possible. You really don't know when to stop, do you? All your life, everything has been handed to you on a silver platter. Ask the warden what it's like in the city. Maybe then, you would understand that threats don't work on all of us, especially me. Be seeing you soon. I disconnected and dropped the phone on the counter. My location was no doubt known to Mercy Botha now. The good thing about industry disappearing from the city 6 decades ago, along with the remnants of the middle class, is that places like this are everywhere. Anyone can take over an old structure, as long as their tetanus shots are current, and they aren't afraid of a little work. In my case, this former fertilizer mill worked out great. I even found some old chemicals in the sub-basement once I cut the freight elevator loose and rappelled down the shaft. I flipped the switch beside the door and walked away from my former home, taking only what city coin I had left and my new ID and credit card. I was probably 2 kilometers away when it blew. The sound of it echoed between the buildings. The fire was visible in a matter of minutes. There would be no response from the fire department as it was outside the registered habitation zone. I spent the following day working my way out of the city. First, I bought a new outfit with city coin and tossed my old clothes. As I neared the outer edges of the city, I stopped in a shopping center, buying somewhat better clothes with the credit card and changing to those. Once I'd made my way outside the city proper, I went to the All Seasons Hotel and booked a room under my new name, Minnie Tilly. I had the concierge buy me a new phone and appropriate outfits after my disastrous sightseeing trip in the city. Minnie Tilly is far from brilliant, and I wanted to make sure everyone knew that, and that she was kinky. The only outfit I specified in precise detail was a black leather strap harness, knee-high stiletto boots, a leather masquerade mask, and an 8-fall flogger. I made the concierge stay in the room as I tried on the outfits and asked about sex clubs. I knew from the guard that this hotel is one of those that sends clients to the SWP. When he mentioned a very exclusive club up north, I knew I was in. Some cajoling plus a few thousand on tips landed me an invitation to the SWP on a night when the warden would likely be there to play. Continuing with the Airhead Nouveau Riche Act, I had the concierge charter a hover flyer for me to get me there and back. I could have rented a self-driving luxury car for a quarter of the price, but I was playing the game. Flying in, the multiple layers of security and widening circles are stark reminders of the nature of the place. Just before we landed, I squealed. This is going to be so fun, and I've never felt safer with all the security. I still put on my best idiot performance until I stepped out of the flyer and put on the leather mask. The first thing I saw inside the flyer were the hidden cameras. The flyer gone, the mask covering the top half of my face, and the overcoat I'd been covered in dropped on the ground, I marched to the guard at the gate, flogger in hand. "Raincoat's optional," I said, that being the daily code word. He led me through the guard shack to a tunnel that led to the club and turned to go. I stopped him by clearing my throat. "Is my Jarvis pig down here tonight?" I asked. I was hoping to give him an early birthday present for being such a little piggy. The guard swallowed hard. It's okay, dear." I cleared it with Mistress Botha. I showed the guard the number I'd saved on my phone. I hoped he'd recognize it. "He's in room B114, but he's with an inmate." He gestured behind himself with a thumb. "I've, gotta get back to my post." "You do that, dear. Thank you for being such a good boy." He turned and ran back to the guard shack. I don't know what he thought I might do to him, but it was better he was gone. The room wasn't locked. None of them were. Some were wide, open, the elite proud of their ability to use and abuse the inmates. He didn't hear me enter, but I slammed the door shut so he'd know I was there. The young woman cuffed to the vaulting horse couldn't have been more than 18, and probably less. Her tear-stained face and puffy red eyes didn't paint a picture of someone who was happy in her position. "Jarvis Pig," I said. "Mistress Botha said you've been a bad boy." "Who are you?" he asked. I struck him across the back with the flogger. "I am in charge, and the first and last. Words out of your mouth will be mistress. Do you understand me, piggy?" "Mistress? Yes, mistress." I smiled internally at how quick he was to fall into the role. I took the handcuff keys from his trousers hanging near the door and released the poor girl. "You probably don't want to see this," I whispered. To her, "So I suggest you run to somewhere safe." She pulled on her prison uniform, watching me cuff the warden to the vaulting horse. I stuffed a gag in his mouth, his expression one of unbridled lust and excitement. It changed to fear the moment I raised my mask. He struggled against the cuffs, tried to yell through the gag, but it was no use. His previous victim asked, "Are you going to kill him?" To my surprise, when I answered in the affirmative, she kicked him, hard, in the balls before she left. It takes a long time and a lot of energy to beat someone to death with a leather flogger. I would guess I was about halfway there when I took a break to look through his clothes. He had a pistol in there, a 24-shot 9mm with a suppressor. Not a standard guard's pistol, more like something a gangster would want. I was tired and shot him in the head. When it was nowhere near as loud as I expected, I walked out of the room to see the girl still standing there. She held out her hand, and I gave her the pistol, put my mask back on, and left. I don't know how long she waited, but she killed 20 and wounded 3, none of which were inmates, before the guards shot her dead. The news cycle was all about the massacre. That had happened at a charity fundraiser being held at the SWP. I turned the view screen off when Ms. Botha began ranting about Minnie Tilly, the killer mistress, and vowing to release huge grants to police everywhere to find her. They might if I don't find Mercy Botha first. Enjoy another story. Greg, come up right away. Oh, and tell the analysts to drop anything they're working on right now. This takes priority. She returned the handset to the cradle. The hardline communication system was older than anything else in the building. In fact, it was older than anything on the moon that wasn't in a museum or itself a tourist attraction. It was secure, though, and that mattered most. The swarthy, mustachioed man burst into her office with a harried air and unkempt hair. "What is it, Grace? Did the signal office pick something up?" Grace turned her monitor around to show Greg. "Not exactly. I got copied on a conversation thread that I don't think I was meant to be included in, sent from the office of Pritnan Antonan." "Who the hell is that?" "If the sound of that name didn't give it away, he's from the Nananan exclave." "I figured that. I just don't know that name." Greg studied the message closer and began to point out the other names. But that's the ambassador's aide, that's their security chief on the station, and I think that's their premier. Right on all. Pritnan Antonin is their minister of war. Grace shook her head. I can't figure out what this would be about, or why my name would be in the minister's contacts. We met here briefly at the gala last year. Charming. Enough for a mass of tentacles, if a little intense, but that's all I know. Greg produced a data crystal and tapped it to the screen. I'll get this downstairs to the analysts. We'll get it decrypted, and then you can figure out what. Translator to call in, since you'll have to read them in. The analysts can't... No, they have one job. Don't try to confuse them with others. Greg stopped halfway out the door. I didn't know they even had a minister of war. Seems wholly unlike them, right? They have a minister. For everything they do, and everything they try to avoid at all costs, like the minister of disease. Greg just grunted and ran back to his underground office. I've got a hot one for you two, he said. Thank you, Greg, Analyst 1 said. We look forward to assisting. How much data do we have? Analyst 2 asked. A message thread. Looks like a dozen or so messages, some of them pages long. May I suggest Analyst 1 begins overall parsing while I start with the shortest messages first? Whatever works best, A2, Greg answered. He tapped the data crystal against the stack of machines in his office, marked A1 and A2 before sitting at his desk. You've probably already realized, but the messages are between Nanex members, so I'm unsure what the language will be, Greg said. That's odd, Analyst 2 said. These short messages all correspond directly to English and decrypt as such using a simple replacement cipher. There's really nothing here to challenge us. How do you figure that? Greg asked. I'm looking at the encrypted message in the English, but I'm not seeing how it lines up. Does this help? Analyst 2 asked, displaying the English text written in the symbols of the Nananan common language. The entire message chain is ready for download, Analyst 1 said. If that is all, we shall return to our previous assignments. Thanks, Greg said, tapping the crystal against his terminal to download the decrypted messages. He sat beside Grace as they read the decrypted messages together. Their English is atrocious, he said. It's not used outside human space. Maybe they figured they'd be able to better hide what they were talking about. Grace paused. We don't have a ship with my name, but that's what this message says. Is it possible the routing AI passed it on to me when it identified my name? Possible, Greg answered. We set up all the infrastructure for the Nanex. Of course, that depends on whether they left it on the default settings. He paused. Yeah, that's probably what happened. I'm more worried about this, she said. Here. We're going to war against ourselves? What would make them think that? He asked. Grace picked up the handset of the relic and clicked the buttons it rested on a couple times. Get me General Ocho. She listened for a moment. Good morning, General. We have a worrying message from the Nananan exclave. Sure, come over. I'll start a fresh pot of coffee. As she hung up, Greg was already moving across her office to the coffee pot. I got this. Extra strong, just like she likes it. The general came in as the coffee maker dinged, signifying it was ready to dispense. Looks like I'm right on time, she said, putting her Marine Academy mug under the spout. No cream, no sugar. The coffee maker filled her mug. Greg offered her the seat he'd been using next to Grace. Something odd's going on in Nanex. Hello, Greg, Grace, she said. Grace took the hint about the niceties. Hi, Nandi. This message chain is concerning. The general sat and sipped her coffee while reading through the messages. Their English is about on par with half the junior officers. She chuckled. This is obviously about the training exercise on Breton. The ship they misidentified as the Grace Alvarez is the Greta Andresen. How do you figure that? Grace asked. Because the Andresen is part of the UP4 for the Breton Resolve exercise, and autocorrect is a thing that will forever haunt us. Nandi leaned back. I think we should bring a couple of the Nananan higher-ups in as observers, including Minister Pritnan. You can do that? Greg asked. I know you've got some pull. But I didn't realize I served with Evan, the SecDef, when we were both butterbars, Nandi cut him off. I'll send a message and let him know that we should be including them in several training exercises, at least until they get the concept. I don't understand, Grace said. Surely they train. That's one of those things that was redacted from a number of reports. When the Nananon were still under Kalari rule, training exercise meant something else entirely. The general sighed. The Kalari Empire would take the fresh troops along on a sure-win mission in order to get them blooded. It was usually against weak resistance forces, and usually from their own homeworld. Oh, Grace closed her eyes. Damn. Let Ambassador Ritnanen know that we're inviting his people to the exercise. I'll call Evan, and we'll have Minister Pritnan on his way to Bredon by this afternoon. Thanks for the coffee. Nandi stood, downing the last of her coffee, then left the office as though it had been nothing more than a casual chat. I'm curious about something, Greg said. Can you load up the original message? Why? She asked, even as she loaded it. Examine headers. Grace followed his instructions to peer into the formatting of the message. He chuckled and pointed. Yep, default settings. There, buried in all the metadata from the communication. Software was the logline. Contact added to CC, name found in translation. Enjoy another story. The world felt way more airy than it had just a second ago. Forrest Haynes had been eating takeout at his desk in his apartment. He'd been working on some pretty important personal life-wise code work. The food had come with him, and so had his computer, his desk, and his chair. The problem was that he absolutely did not live in a medieval castle. Moreover, he had one roommate who was currently out at the time, not several dozen. None of them were women or kings, or obvious spellcasting types. The most fantastical thing he'd seen in the last few months had been witnessing his first street clown, a species which he'd thought had gone extinct. Greetings, wise conjured. A middle-aged man in fancy monarch robes splayed out his hands and bowed towards Forrest. Forrest still had fork-pierced sesame chicken raised towards his open mouth. He finished the motion, chewed for a bit, and swallowed while he tried to determine if he'd been exposed to any chemicals or illicit substances somehow in the last 24 hours. There were several existential crises to consider here, if he weren't on something. The obvious existence of magic, or second realities, or highly organized surprise LARP groups who'd unlock the secret of instantaneous teleportation of random indie devs. Forrest stared at a tall, cat-like lady. His roommate was more into this stuff than he was demi-human the word here? For a solid few awkward seconds. Can I finish dinner first? Pleading for processing time won out over panicked fleeing or appeals to God. Forrest was, after all, firmly an atheist. The probable king nodded and had him shown to a room. Forrest finished the contents of the to-go box, laid back on a very large bed that felt inappropriately fancy for him, and tried to wait things out, in the hopes there was some kind of time limit on the duration of this bullshit ordeal. By the time they finally came to get him, he'd decided to become agnostic going forward. Forrest remembered being forced against his will to try out several Japanese cartoons in a certain subgenre. It was not that he hated that particular type of animated entertainment. It was that his roommate was annoying and seemed to think his taste and Forrest's should be roughly the same. Forrest leaned towards classics, mature long runners, and more science-fictional things. His roommate would tolerate seemingly anything, like he was undergoing endurance training that doubled as self-gaslighting. These feelings now turned against him and made him feel mildly insensitive in a way he couldn't place. Was it a cosmic statement to bring Chinese food into a Japanese Portal fantasy-style situation? Was it weird he was wondering why the locals weren't more freakish in a socially and ethically grating sort of way? Have you made contact with the beyond? Wise conjured? The king was sitting a few feet away from him in a chair at an old table in the king's personal quarters. He seemed to be an intelligent, thoughtful sort, going by his choice of decor and decorations. Bookish Forrest stared at his laptop, which was currently hooked up to a portable charger that had been sitting on his desk. He wondered what had happened. If he lost power at some point, would they chant and magic it back on, or send him home while they nursed crushing disappointment? They'd asked him with great gravity to do something very easy. That caddish lady was sitting in a corner of the room, legs crossed, arms over her chest. She looked about to fall asleep. Forrest really didn't want to look at her. He'd missed a few things the first time, thoroughly overloaded. Now that he was calm, the second impression had almost made him throw up. He opened up the game code. The king had performed the greatest of anachronisms Forrest had ever seen by pulling out an old metal box-bound external hard drive clearly preserved with some kind of magic runework from a very dusty relic case with far more era-appropriate artifacts still sitting snugly in the other spaces. The project files were lumped under a folder called Other Realm 0.5. There was no wacky, grueling decrypting or hacking involved in just running the game in untrue engine. Forrest went through a character creator of some kind, filling in a multi-choice backstory and everything, and was horrified when he realized it had possibly spawned his character into this actual real place. That got confirmed. There was someone standing outside the castle gates who'd been blatantly possessed until Forrest had closed the game without making a save. Forrest was assured the new citizen would be given a proper introduction. He didn't like the weird, perturbed look the king was giving him. Okay, so you just want me to fix your corruption problem, right? Forrest resisted to urge the stare at the cat lady. Yes, we believe deeply, in light of recent revelations regarding certain uncovered artifacts, that the goddess of healing would never... The king started. I'll fix it real quick, sure. Yeah, no problem. Then I want hazard pay. Emotional hazards, but still, the whole ordeal took all of 30 minutes. Forrest accessed the code directly, choosing to not try to open the game and poke around anymore. If, impurity of the soul, Barter 10, cast self-corruptive heal. Forrest rubbed his chin. He was, to say the least, flabbergasted. So, if you don't, mind me asking, who exactly set this up? Do you have grand high archwizards or gods or whatever who write this stuff? It was a very basic error. Some dumbass had put semicolons, unfinished statements, and other baby coders' first slip-ups all over the place. The entire healing skill tree was currently set to give whoever used it downright eldritch mutations just to unstub toes. It actually might take a while just to unflub all this. The king went full NPC on Forrest, going through a metaphorical dialogue, tree filled with Q&As. Forrest half listened, nodded, quietly working and cursing colorfully as he awed at the poor workmanship displayed before him. The day eventually ended. The sun started to lower while Forrest pictured a random fantasy person roaming the castle grounds, wondering what cruel god had dropped them into the world at tax-paying age with such wildly skewed information and knowledge sets. The cat lady stood, up with all her unusual height. Forrest traced her form from foot to tail to spine to head, counting deformities in everything from claws so sharp and ingrown they probably bled consistently to a skeleton that was clearly unhappy about being overgrown. Without any guidance, it was a wonder she could stand at all. She pulled down her hood, giving Forrest a good look at her freakish eyes and her misshapen jaw and too numerous teeth. She said some magic words, cast a spell, and Forrest stubbed his toe hard on cue. His toe stopped aching before he could even curse. Forrest smiled. Nothing bad happened as far as he could tell. The healer lady seemed pleased and like she might cry over it. I guess all that self-taught shit wasn't a waste of time after all. I'm getting paid for this, right? He asked. They'd said anything you desire as a reward. Rent was coming up soon. So you're telling me this whole time all that magicked up income was literally magicked up. A very hard-looking agent from the United States of America's Internal Revenue Service was staring dumbfounded at what he could only think of as an existential crisis-in-a-box bullshit fairyland rug pull. One Forrest Haynes had started getting unexplained money. A lot of unexplained money. There'd been some novice work involving offshore accounts, but it had clearly not been the handiwork of a practiced tax evader, more the panicked, step-skipping investing of an average citizen who wasn't used to having to explain sudden onset wealth. So the agent went down to Forrest's apartment, and Forrest sighed and said, I can explain. Then, the potential scam involving the wild success of a definitely still unpublished game had turned into whatever the hell this was. Kid, how'd they even wire you the money? Code magic. Magic code. I guess I had to do part of it myself, but it worked. Into US dollars? I changed the currency name and uploaded a model I found on an asset store. I had to look up a lot of stuff about how you guys make the money legit. Took a lot of coding, but Forrest shrugged, sheepish. Had to make rent somehow? Was kind of taking a lot of time away from my day job and my night job. I'm going to be honest. I have no idea where to even begin with starting on figuring out how to tax this in a paperwork-conforming way. How exactly does one chase financial fraud across 2 dimensions? Would he need to reference international laws? So, I'm off the hook? No, you're responsible, just not in the way that makes a damn bit of sense. The agent looked out at a very impressive castle. There was some kind of structure being built next to it, with a banner he couldn't read proclaiming something. Judging by the old-timey nurse-looking types running around and the sick children and citizens, though, it was probably some fancy hospital-church combo. Does this count as first contact? Do I get a Nobel Prize or... The agent had been a determined atheist up until this point. He was currently considering converting to mesotheism. AN, first product of the genre roulette. I've got 45 plus or so other subgenres to go through. Figured I should get the one I'm least into out of the way first. This one is isekai. Please don't burn me at the stake, the checklist compelled me. Thanks for diving into this story with me. Don't miss out on the next one. Hit that subscribe button. Give this video a big thumbs up.